people in jiu-jitsu always talk about learn to relax, learn to be calm, and when you're training, very hard to be calm in training when you're stressed out or you're worried or you feel like you're going to get submitted. So by developing a very, very strong defense, it gives you the ability to relax because you know whatever comes your way, you can deal with.
Welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ford. My guest today is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's actually the third American to receive a black belt under Hixon Gracie. He was the head instructor at Hixon's for several years, and some of his students include Anthony Hardonk, Vladimir Matushenko, Ronda Rousey, and Kron Gracie, just to name a few. He teaches seminars all over the world and has global affiliates as well under his banner Hidden Jiu-Jitsu. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be joined today for the fourth time on the show by Henry Akins. How are you today, Henry?
Good. What's up, Ryan?
Good. I'm happy to have you back, man. It's been a couple of years since you've been on. Man, catch us up. What have you been up to in the last couple of years?
Just still doing the same thing. I have my website, hiddenjujitsu.com, where I kind of release instructionals, and also on the BJJ Fanatics platform, I've been releasing instructionals. And then just traveling the world trying to spread and share my jiu-jitsu.
That's awesome, man. And I know you just came off of a pretty big tour. Where all were you recently?
Yeah, so I was in New Zealand. The last big trip I had was New Zealand, Australia, where I promoted one of my black belts there in Australia, Matt Jones. And then I went to Singapore and stopped in Singapore for a couple of days and trained with Shatri, who is the CEO of One FC. So spent just a couple of days there training with him, and then had a camp in Japan.
If I ask the listeners out there to close their eyes and picture jiu-jitsu, I think most people would imagine like a submission or a takedown or a sweep or a transition to a dominant position. But there's a facet of jiu-jitsu that carries such great importance that usually doesn't make it to highlight reels, and that's defense. A lot of students don't consider defense to be the most exciting part of jiu-jitsu. What are some ways that you'd like to reframe that in a student's mind?
Defense is the foundation of jiu-jitsu, right? I mean, if you think about the strategy behind the art and the philosophy behind the art. So originally, at least from the Elio branch of jiu-jitsu, the concept was always, how do we create an art that a smaller, weaker individual can overcome a bigger, stronger individual? And in order to be able to do that, a lot of times what happens is it takes time. And so the key concept in that was, what happens is, as a smaller individual, usually you're fighting someone bigger, stronger people get tired quicker. You can see that in MMA events. If you watch the heavyweights fight and you watch the lightweights fight, you can see the pace and how quickly that pace diminishes with the heavyweights. And so the idea for jiu-jitsu is, how do we create an art where we can overcome bigger, stronger individuals? Well, sometimes what happens is you have to wait for them to get tired. And in order to survive, you have to have a very, very strong defense. So that was always kind of the philosophy for us in training, create kind of like an impenetrable defense. And that way, if you can't be submitted, eventually you're going to win. And so that's something that Hixon always talked about in his philosophy. One of the things he always used to say is, one of his goals was always to make himself invincible. And being invincible doesn't mean that you can beat everybody, but it means you can't be beaten. And so that's a different kind of mindset of how to think about winning in jiu-jitsu, is if nobody can beat you, eventually you're going to win, right? So, that was a very, very strong part of the strategy and philosophy, which was really grounded in how our training philosophy and our training style, so you can see that. I mean, there's videos on BJJ Fanatics of, Bernardo locking in a fully locked in triangle, pulling my head down and me being able to escape, or him flattening me out with a rear naked choke, fully locked in rear naked choke, belly down, hooks in, and me being able to get out. So that's those situations, and those I've trained so much that I know exactly what to do, once you get caught, and how to still escape. It gives you a different level of confidence in training to know that you can't be submitted, or to know that regardless of whatever situation, whatever terrible situations you end up in, if you end up on the bottom of mount, if you end up in, bottom of cross-eyed and guys that you can still get out. So, it definitely, people in jiu-jitsu always talk about learn to relax, learn to be calm. And when you're training, very hard to be calm in training when you're stressed out, or you're worried, or you feel like you're going to get submitted. So, by developing a very, very strong defense, it gives you the ability to relax, because whatever comes your way, you can deal with.
When we say the word defense, when referring to an art that's as dynamic as jiu-jitsu, that can definitely be a very general term. How would you categorize the different modes of defense within jiu-jitsu? Like, what are the pillars of defense within the art?
You have the striking defense, how to defend yourself from strikes, which is super important, which unfortunately nowadays most schools do not train. So from each position, what are the tools my opponent has that he can hurt me, and how do I defend myself from that? And then I think the next level is you have submission defense, how to defend different submissions from each position, how to stay safe. And there's layers to the defenses, because if you think about the attack, what happens when someone's attacking is there's always multiple steps to get to the finish. So when someone initiates attack, like if your instructor is teaching you a technique in class, it's usually a series of 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 steps. So when you think about the defense, all you're looking to do is interrupt one movement in that sequence. And if you can interrupt one movement in the sequence, you can shut down the attack. And so that's really, really important for us to understand when you think about submission defense. There's a lot of times multiple stages and multiple layers where you can actually start to defend, where you can basically shut down the next step in the sequence, which prevents them from getting to the finish.
How do you think that's best absorbed by a student? Is time the only way for that to really sink into a student, or are there ways that they can mindfully learn to break down techniques and recognize them in those steps?
Yeah, it's very mindful. It's it's basically just reverse engineering everything. Once you understand the elements or the steps needed to get the submission, now you know how to defend it, because all you have to do is prevent one of those steps. And so already that gives you an idea, like, okay, he's putting his hand here. If I don't let him put his hand here, he's not going to be able to finish. Oh, he's securing my arm. If I don't let him secure my arm, he's not going to be able to finish. He's going to step over my head. If I don't let him step over my head, he's not going to be able to finish. So that's a super important thing, is that concept or idea of how do I reverse engineer each position and each technique so I can shut down one step in that sequence.
There's the whole idea of defensive measures that we can take in the form of escapes from bad positions, or even submission attempts, like you pointed out earlier. I think you'd agree that prevention is probably the mark of someone that has really good defensive awareness. Having the wherewithal to identify something bad coming your way and avoiding it is obviously much better than having to work your way out of a bad spot. How can students consciously develop preemptive defense skills in their day-to-day training? What's a good way for the average student to go about doing that?
You have to understand, obviously, prevention, but you also have to understand how to escape when shit hits the fan, because you look at all the best guys in the world, pretty much all the best guys in the world still get finished from time to time, right? So you need to have it all. Obviously, the sooner that you can start to interrupt the submission, the more time you have, because if you interrupt it on the second step, instead of waiting till the fifth step, or as things get further along, it's harder to defend because you have to start to kind of unwind things. So again, it goes back to understanding, hey, these are the elements my opponent needs to be able to finish me with this submission. How do I take those elements away? It's a very simple concept, but obviously, you have to take a look at each submission, each sequence, and then kind of reverse engineer it. Okay, how do I prevent, this step or this step from happening, or this step from happening? So
Coming up on in the ranks in jiu-jitsu, what position or submission do you feel like you struggled with defending the most? What was something that was just really a thorn in your side over the years? And how did you eventually, I guess, what was the process of you learning how to get caught in it less?
I guess the triangle was a big one for me earlier on in my career. And just because, the squeeze with the legs is so strong. When someone has their legs wrapped around your neck, it's such a powerful squeeze. And so really understanding the correct positioning and how to quickly escape with all escapes, like once something gets fully locked in, you have a very, very limited amount of time to basically do all of the right steps to get out. And so, obviously prevention is first and foremost, but once you get caught, how do you still get out, right? And you can see that there's a lot of, like, if you watch the arm lock with Hodger and Buchecha, I mean, Buchecha had his arm fully extended, so a lot of guys that are training the right way, training their defense the right way, can still escape, basically last ditch when the opponent has everything they want, when they have the arm extended or they have the choke fully locked in, how to get out. So, yeah, for me, I think the triangle was a big one, but it's just practice, putting myself in the triangle, having the guys not squeeze at the beginning. So, even I'm in the position, but they're not squeezing. So I have a lot of time to be able to develop my defense and then have them gradually start squeezing. And so then the time becomes more limited. So with learning in jiu-jitsu in general, it's always beneficial to do things in a progression, meaning you start off with zero resistance, but then you train your way up to be able to deal with situations with 100% resistance, because obviously that's super important for us in jiu-jitsu is we need to be able to beat someone that is 100% resisting us, right? But it doesn't make sense to learn a technique where your training partner is giving you zero resistance and then expecting you to execute that technique, whether it's a defense or whether it's an attack or whether it's an escape, for you to be able to execute it going from 0 to 100% resistance, right? So, in jiu-jitsu, it's really, really important to always develop your skill using a progression of resistance.
That's excellent. Now, obviously, this wouldn't be the most fun thing to do in day-to-day training, but it's very valuable. Putting yourself in the very position that you're struggling with. Is that something that you encourage students to do a lot?
I guess it depends on who you ask, right?
Yeah.
That is the most valuable thing because, again, it develops your confidence. If you know that no matter what position you get stuck in, no matter what position you're in, you can get out and you feel comfortable, completely changes your expression of jiu-jitsu, how you perform in jiu-jitsu, that you can be relaxed in the most uncomfortable positions. And so, when I train, that I almost always start out in bad positions. I always let my opponent start off either cross-eyed or mounted or on my back or somewhere, just so I can always start to train my defense a little bit. Because once certain individuals get to a specific level, they're going to be better than, a lot of, like the black belt. He's better than 90% of the people in his gym, right? So quite often, because he's so much better than everyone, if he doesn't allow himself to get put in bad situations, he doesn't have the ability to develop the defenses. And so it's really important to expose yourself to that, so that you stay sharp. Because, again, with jiu-jitsu, it's a skill-based, and if you don't practice something for a long time, your skill diminishes, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Henry, there's a notion that if you're able to keep your opponent on their heels with a steady sequence of attacks, you can keep them in a defensive cycle and prevent them from attacking you as frequently. What are your thoughts on the idea of offense being like an extra layer of defense in itself?
Well, I don't think offense is a defense in itself, in that usually when you're attacking, you're in the dominant position. So usually if you're in the dominant position, and that's why in jiu-jitsu we say position before submission, usually when you're in the dominant position, you have the advantage, meaning very unlikely for the other person. So if I'm mounted on someone, very unlikely that they're going to submit me.
Sure, yeah.
If I'm cross-eyed on someone, very unlikely, unless they do like a buggy choke really well, very unlikely that they're going to submit me. So it's not so much a defense. What it is, when you start to attack, sometimes what happens is the person shifts their focus from escaping to defending. So you're forcing the other person to defend, which a lot of times stifles their escapes, if that makes sense. So if I'm mounted and I start going for your neck and you start bringing your hands up to defend the choke, you're not thinking about doing an elbow escape or a hip escape or trap and roll. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I guess I was thinking more from the perspective of like playing guard, where you're, the person's trying to pass your guard. You're trying to obviously maintain position and attack, retain guard and attack. Using attacks frequently seems like it would be something that would disrupt them, putting him in that defensive position like you described.
The guard is an interesting position in jiu-jitsu because, and I assume you're talking about the open guard, because we have two guards. We have a closed guard and we have an open guard. And in jiu-jitsu, the strategy for the closed guard and the strategy for the open guard are polar opposites. When it comes to open guard, because the only time your opponent can pass your guard is once they've opened your legs, right? So when it comes to open guard is both an offensive and a defensive position, meaning from the open guard, you still have the ability to sweep. You have the ability to go for submissions, but also you're defending the pass. So you're trying to stop the other person from advancing their position. So with the open guard is a very interesting position because you're having to play defense by creating space, by using frames to try to keep the person's pressure off you, keep them away from you, keep them from getting close because they're trying to get their chest to your chest. And at the same time, looking to sweep or submit. And with that, sometimes, yes, when you start to attack from the open guard, a lot of times what happens is your opponent will retreat. So they start to back up or they'll start to pull away to avoid the attacks or avoid the sweeps, which helps you with your basically guard retention or preventing the pass, right? Because it's a very simple concept for passing. Your job when you're trying to pass the guard is you need to get your chest to your opponent's chest. You need to get close. So any movement backwards is completely counterproductive to your goal, which is getting close.
Henry, what do you think are some really good general principles when it comes to defending and escaping bad positions? What are some things that are true, whether you're on bottom mount or bottom side, that people should be focusing on?
There's two elements, right? Like if you can escape from, if someone's mounted on you and you can escape the position because the position changes and they don't have the dominant position anymore, that's a defense in itself, meaning you've advanced your position, you've escaped it. So someone's mounted on me and I'm able to do a guard recovery. It's going to be very difficult for them to head and arm me. It's going to be very difficult for them to arm bar me from inside my guard, right? So we have the ability to escape the positions, but then we also have specifically submission defenses. One of the big concepts about escaping positions is anytime you're on the bottom is you want to get to your side, right? So mount, if you can get to your side, opens up your elbow escape a lot better, or some people use more of a shrimping escape. So getting to your side is really, really important. And the same thing with cross side. So that's kind of, and even half guard. If you can get off your back, flat off your back, if you can start to get to your side from the half guard, it opens up options and it starts to help you with your escapes. When it comes to submission defenses from the position, again, it's very, very specific to the submission. So there's no general, this is something that you need to do to defend all submissions. It's very specific to the exact submission that they're trying to do to you.
You mentioned earlier that the idea of Helio Gracie's philosophy that time is an important facet of defense. What role do you think that patience plays in defending from inferior positions?
If you watch the early days of the UFC, right, the matches, because it was no weight division, they were also no time limit, because it gave the ability for the smaller guy to be able to work. The other thing that was important about the old days of the UFC when it first came out was that the referee was not allowed to stand people up, right? So it gave the grappler and the smaller individual more time to work. Patience is always important, but timing is important too, because you need to be able to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. So it's good to be patient, especially if you understand the concept of how to force your opponent to work harder than you so that they're burning more energy than you are. It's a very important concept in jiu-jitsu. And that's a lot of times where weight distribution comes in, understanding how to use your weight effectively on your opponents so that as they move, they're carrying your weight, which forces them to burn more energy so they tire quicker. And as you know, as people tire, their performance drops, right? And so I think everybody probably watching has probably had that experience where, they're doing rounds and then they have to sit out a round because they're so exhausted, they feel like they would be kind of useless in a role, right? And so no matter what the skill level is, once you start to get exhausted, your performance drops. So patience is important in that aspect if you have a no time limit situation. But obviously, when you do have time limits, when, like IBJJF, you have 5-minute matches or 10-minute matches, a lot of times you don't have the time to be patient. So it depends on what context you're training, what environment you're training for.
Yeah, that's precisely what I was going to ask next. Because I was going to ask how you feel that like time limits that are imposed by competition or training rounds hinders people's ability to be patient like that. What advice would you give to people who are training in a scenario where they want to compete and there is time on the clock and they're in a bad position? What can they do to access those defensive systems quickly and efficiently when when time is against them?
At the end of the day, the goal is to win. The only way that you can win is by being offensive. So you can't just lay on the bottom, stay safe, and win a tournament from staying safe, unfortunately. You have to have some type of offensive. You have to be advancing position or have some type of offensive. And so when you're, unfortunately, when you're training for competition, especially when you have like the Masters, World Masters, where the matches are only 5 minutes, 5 minutes goes by like that. So there is no such thing as really being patient unless you're up on points and unless you're winning already. So then, in those situations where you're up on points and you're winning, then you can kind of pull back a little bit and be more patient and more looking to just neutralize your opponent's movements. But it's a completely different strategy competing in tournaments and rolling at the gym.
You talked earlier about being exhausted, and that's something that I think is important to zoom in on. How important is it for students to continue training and not skip rounds when they're completely exhausted, even if they're just laying on the bottom defending? Is that something that you feel everyone should try their best to push through? What are your thoughts on that, on training exhausted?
It depends on how exhausted. I mean, if you're completely useless and you can't move, then there's no point, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to implement techniques. You have to move. You have to adjust based on your opponent's movements. So it's always good to train. I mean, what's more important than training exhausted is training efficiently. Meaning, instead of going 100% or 90% when you roll, training at a 20% so that you can basically train for hours. So yeah, training exhausted is not as important as training efficiently.
Let's say we're taking someone who's older or weaker or less athletic than their training partners or opponents. What mindset would you try to instill in that person when they come in to train every day? What should be when they're thinking about their defense and being effective on the mats? What mindset would you try to get that person into? What are some mantras or some things that you think they should really be focusing on when they come in to train every day?
I mean, the strategy with jiu-jitsu in general, how the progression normally works in jiu-jitsu. When you're new, you're brand new, you go start out at a gym, right? You've never trained before. It's your first day. You're the worst person in the room, unless there's someone else new. Because you're the worst person in the room, more than likely you're going to be dominated. More than likely you're going to be in bad positions because you don't understand how to escape yet. You don't understand what are the good positions to get to. And so the philosophy always with jiu-jitsu is the first thing you learn, because you're constantly going to be in bad positions, is how to not get submitted, how to defend, And then the second thing you learn after you're able to buy yourself time, after you're, let's say you first start out and you're getting submitted every 30 seconds or every minute, gradually it becomes every 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And then once you're able to survive in those positions longer, then you start learning how to escape, right? Once you learn to escape, then what happens is a lot of times you end up in a dominant position. And so then once you end up in dominant positions, is how do you maintain those dominant positions? The longer that you can maintain a dominant position, the more time you have to finish, right? And usually the skill of submitting people is one of the last things that develop in most people's game.
We do have a lot of listeners out there that are relatively new to the game. Most of our listeners are white belts. So I think having this framework from someone at your level to give them something useful to go into training with really helps. So I do appreciate that. Henry, I'll tell you what, we've reached about the halfway point of the show, man. This is where I always play a game with my guests. You've done this before. It's a game called the Pummel. The Pummel's a series of random questions. Some of these are about jiu-jitsu. Some of them have nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. But if you're down to play the Pummel again, I'd love to play this with you.
Sure.
All right, man. I've added a few new questions since you've been on. What's the largest animal you think you could take on in hand-to-hand combat?
Largest animal? A horse.
A horse. Yeah, good one. I was gonna say, I know you're out there like where there's mountain lions and things like that. So I was curious what that answer would be.
Mountain lion, bears, any type of apex predator. I don't know if I like my chances.
I appreciate the honesty, man. If you found a genie lamp and you could have 3 wishes, normal genie rules apply, so no killing people and no wishing for more wishes. What would you wish for?
3 wishes. Abundance and world peace. Abundance for everyone and world peace. Happiness. I think that's a whatever that looks like to each individual. That's all I can think of. I mean, there's not, I'm not a materialistic person. So like for me, like having things doesn't matter. It's more, quality of life. So
that's great. I love it, man. Those are great answers. And you get to keep the third one in the pocket. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. You can use it later. What do you think is the worst job you ever had?
Telemarketing, cold calling people. It's the worst job ever.
Yeah, that's rough.
I did that for a very brief period of time. I think I lasted like 10 days.
Yeah. Longer than I would have made it, I'm sure. Yeah. If having people like swear and hang up on you is not a fun way to spend the day. So I feel you on that. What's a secret talent that you have that people might not be aware of?
People are probably aware of it, but I can change my weight in an instant. So I can make myself feel like I'm 100 pounds, or I can make myself feel like I'm 500 pounds. And so that's something very, very shocking for a lot of people.
What's something you wish you were better at outside of martial arts?
I would have to say my focus. I think what I've noticed within myself recently is I started to like develop ADHD, where like my mind doesn't want to focus on one thing, and it would be so much more beneficial for me to have the ability to. I probably need to meditate more, but yeah, I could focus more, but my brain is kind of like is on overdrive, and I'm always like jumping to the next thing. So
that's a good answer. Is that something you've only experienced at this point in your life, or is it something you think you've always had? No, it's something that's recent within the maybe last few years, where I struggle. And I've read a little bit. They say they think it could be because of cell phones, and we're always like scrolling through stuff, and so your brain always is wanting like a. Yeah. Could definitely be that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've suffered from ADD my whole life, as long as I can remember, as a little kid. So it's interesting when I hear people who are later in life finding that they're having the same kind of things. And social media and the speed of information could definitely be a part of that for sure. I could see that. What do you think is the worst injury that you've ever had through jiu-jitsu?
I've been super fortunate, man. I've sprained my neck, but I've never had any catastrophic injuries through jiu-jitsu. I guess I blew out my ACL in a tournament, both my ACLs. That would be a catastrophic injury, and it took me a year to rehab myself. I never had the surgery. I was very young at the time, and I didn't have health insurance, so I didn't have the money to do the surgery on both ACLs. So I rehabbed myself. That was probably, yeah.
That's a rough one. Yeah, double ACL. That's rough, man.
Yeah. In the open division, I was in the open division. I was purple belt in the open division. I'd won my division, and then entered the open division. And my first match in the open division, I did a drop Seanagi on a guy that was like 240, and I was 175 at the time. And he jumped to the side, and both my knees buckled. So,
oh, damn, that's awful, man. Well, I'm glad that overall, though, you've been pretty lucky along the way with getting hurt. But that's a rough one to have two of them in one go. That's bad, man. What do you think is your favorite junk food to eat?
Oh man, I have a sweet tooth. Like, I love pastries, gummies, ice cream. I have a really bad sweet tooth. I've been working on it, but yeah. Sugar is like crack cocaine. They say it's as a crack, right? So
yeah. It's supposed to be really bad for you for sure. But I know what you mean, man. Yeah, there's nothing like a good piece of candy or something sweet. What's your most hated food? What's something you cannot eat no matter what?
I have a pretty extensive palette of food. Something that really grosses me out. Let me think. Nothing on the top of my head. I eat cuisine from, I travel so much, and I eat cuisine from so many different places, you know?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's good, man. It means you enjoy food. I'm right there with you. What do you think was the scariest moment of your life?
Oh gosh, I've had a couple of like near-death experiences where, you know, not actual NDEs, but like almost driving my car off a cliff. One time the car like spun out, and we almost went over this cliff in Pacific Palisades as I was driving to the gym. When I was younger, I was driving on a 2-lane road, and a car pulled out and was passing a truck. So it was basically going to be a head-on collision, and I pulled off like last minute and swerved, and the car spun out and flipped. So couple of those. I was in a motorcycle. Yeah, the motorcycle accident a couple of years ago was pretty bad too. Everything went slow motion. It was pretty crazy. I went flying off the bike, and my face hit the ground and skid across the asphalt. And I just kept thinking, like, everything kind of went slow motion. I was just thinking, I need to get out of the street or else I'm going to get run over. And then I got out of the street, and my thumb was ripped off. And that was a close one.
Oh my God, man. Did they have to reattach your thumb?
Yeah.
Wow, dude, unreal. That's crazy. Yeah, I've heard people say that, like when there's a really crazy, when you have crazy dumps of adrenaline and like a near-death experience, that things do slow down like that, and it's
crazy.
It's interesting. Yeah, wow. I'm glad you're all right, man. What do you think is your favorite and most reliable takedown?
Gosh, I don't necessarily say I have a favorite, because it all depends on the scenario. There's a lot of takedowns that I like, and it just depends on the situation or the setup. You know, I've trained a lot on my feet. But I would say if there is one takedown that I would highly encourage people to learn, would be the low single. It's just such a valuable takedown to do. It's super easy, super effortless. You can do it. You can hit it from very, very far. You can hit it from very, very close. A very, very useful takedown.
Great answer. Really good answer. Who's your favorite grappler of all time?
I mean, I would say Hixon, just because I spent so much time with him, and I got to see so many of his trainings with, like, you know, for 15 years, all of the current world champions that would come in year after year after year, and just to see. So he's definitely, obviously, my biggest inspiration, because to see someone attain that level it's insane, you know? Yeah, so definitely Hixon, because I mean, I still don't I haven't seen any guys in the past few decades that have attained the level that he was able to attain, meaning the gap that he was able to attain against the current guys, you know? I'll give you an example. When Hodger submitted Buchecha, he came out of retirement and submitted Buchecha. Must have been probably 6 or 7 years ago. Did you see that match?
Of course. Absolutely.
2 minutes after it hit the ground, the match was like 6 minutes or something like that, but 2 minutes after it hit the ground, Hodger was able to take the back and catch him in like a bow and arrow from the back, right? So imagine if they slapped hands and he did it again and again and again and again and again. That's what I got to witness, right? Hixon in his 40s, and I think Hodger was 39 at that match, but Hixon in his 40s, dominating all of the current world champs and submitting them, multiple times in like a 5 or a 10-minute roll.
I've heard the stories of like the garage days of Hixon and how he'd bring in like the best of the best to train with him and would just go one at a time with each person. That must have been unreal, just to be a fly on the wall in that room and witness that.
Yeah, he would light up 5 black belts and Shark Tank himself. He would sit on the mat for 2 hours, not leave the mat, and basically pull in a fresh guy every 5, 6, 7 minutes, and just Shark Tank himself.
That's incredible. You can only imagine, like for the champions he's doing that to. That must have been almost an existential crisis at some point. It's like, dude, how am I this high up in the game and someone is this much higher than me? That must be a really crazy feeling.
All of the guys, the high level guys, the world champions that had an opportunity to train with them, that were lucky enough to be able to train with them, they all share a similar experience. They either say that I felt like a white belt, I feel like I don't know any jiu-jitsu, I felt helpless, I couldn't do anything. So, you talk to Fabio Gurgel. Fabio Gurgel is very vocal about his experiences training with Hixon, Saulo, Shanji, all those guys. And Fabio Gurgel has created more world champions than any coach, right, in jiu-jitsu. So
yeah, well, I'm one of my instructors, one of Fabio's students. I train under Damian Maya now, and Damian always talks about how just the incredible time he spent with Hixon and how much.
Yeah, Damian. I remember when Damian came and Damian rolled with Crone. I remember, he came and spent some time, and Hixon had a huge influence on him.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Who do you think is your favorite MMA fighter of all time?
I like Damian, just because of his expression of jiu-jitsu, how he was able to kind of, even in that environment where there's weight divisions where you have guys that are training specifically to beat him, how he was, he kind of transitioned back. And it was funny because it was actually, I think after he got together with Hixon, that Hixon really encouraged him to focus on his jiu-jitsu instead of doing stand-up. It was after the Nate Marquardt fight where he got knocked out by Nate really quick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He visited, and I think Hixon was a big influence in really telling him, hey, really focus on the holes in your jiu-jitsu so that you're already so much better than everyone in jiu-jitsu. Use that instead of trying to be a 1 year or 2 year stand-up fighter against guys that have been doing striking for 10, 15 years, right? I really like him because he was able to dominate so many high-level guys strictly with jiu-jitsu. So I feel for MMA, he was probably the best representative of jiu-jitsu. Fighters in general, I think John Jones is probably the undisputed GOAT,
Great answers. Yeah, great answers. It's interesting what you said there about after Damian lost to Nate Marquardt, because there really is a contrast before and after that on the emphasis of just using jiu-jitsu. And I feel like Damian's like the last guy that really has one style. Like in the old MMA days, it was much more style versus style. Like everyone did a little bit of everything, but there was one predominant style that each fighter.
It wasn't MMA back then. So if you remember when it started, it was called NHB. It was called No Holds Barred.
Yes.
It didn't become MMA, mixed martial arts, until all of the other martial artists started to cross-train with jiu-jitsu because they realized they had to learn jiu-jitsu in order to be competitive in these events, because they knew if the fight had hit the ground against a grappler, they were done. So what happened was all of the martial artists that had focused on striking arts started to incorporate jiu-jitsu or some form of grappling so that they could, survive on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I really do feel like he's one of the last guys that just represents one style like that. It's kind of like a blast from the past almost,
Yeah.
What do you remember about those days? You were obviously very much involved in jiu-jitsu during those days. Did you see a huge influx of traditional martial artists and people from other styles coming into Hixon's trying to adapt jiu-jitsu?
Well, when I first started, we still had challenge matches quite often. Every couple of weeks we had challenge matches, and it's basically a promotion. Come in and beat one of the Gracies and you can win some money. Obviously almost everyone lost. And then they end up signing up because they realized how ineffective their art was once a clinch happened or once things got to the ground. So, during those old days, you still see it now. Everybody, jiu-jitsu, I believe, is the fastest growing martial art in the world. And it's that way because it's so effective, right? And I think that you can train it at a very, very high intensity relatively safely.
What are your thoughts on the direction that jiu-jitsu's grown since you first started?
I'm indifferent to it. So, I'm ecstatic about the growth of the art. How much it's grown. Never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined that, there's jiu-jitsu schools in every town now. Like even small towns that I drive through, I'll see like a jiu-jitsu school. So that's amazing. Has it moved away a little bit from its roots? Yes, but at the end of the day, it still serves people. The art, still serves people, as in it helps people to develop confidence within themselves. It teaches them, even if they're not training in an environment with strikes, they would still be far more effective in a fight than someone that had never trained. Right. So I think, regardless of how the sports evolve, some people are really big onto the self-defense and non-self-defense jiu-jitsu. What's important is that it's growing and that obviously it still helps people tremendously. Otherwise, you wouldn't see as massive a growth.
Yeah, really good answer. Let me ask you this. Who's your favorite superhero?
I used to collect comic books when I was younger. So, I was like a little bit of a comic book nerd.
Awesome. You're in good company.
Gosh. Silver Surfer. I always liked Thor, Silver Surfer. Just because, Silver Surfer was so powerful, right?
Great answer, dude. Yeah, it's funny. My kids are 2 and 4 now, so they're just starting to really get into superhero stuff. And we found the old '90s Silver Surfer cartoon on Disney. So they've been watching that a lot. It's really good. Yeah. I was always into Silver Surfer as well, so that's a good answer. If you could have a superpower, what would you choose?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I could have a superpower. There's so many good ones. That's the problem. Like invisibility is a great one, right? Being able to fly is a good one. Being able to time travel. Can you imagine if you could time travel and not do all of the mistakes that you've done in your life? If you could travel backwards, or even if you wanted to be wealthy, right? You could trade stocks and you know what stocks are going to pump. So, pretty tough one.
I think that would be the exclusive reason I'd use that power, is to just go back and undo stupid shit that I've done.
I would be constantly traveling backwards in time and undoing stuff. So,
final question for the Pummel game, Henry. If a zombie apocalypse breaks out right now, what's the first thing you do?
I go get my guns out of my safe and go get the guns and ammo out of the safe.
That's good. Ready to rock. I love it. That's awesome. And Henry, that was the final question for the Pummel game. Congratulations. You win again. You got your double underhooks. So, let me take you back into the main show here. So, Henry, just before the Pummel, we were discussing defensive concepts that are really important for students who are less athletic than their opponents. And a position that's often brought up in those for those individuals is half guard. For students that are listening that might not be aware of why that's such a beneficial position, would you mind breaking it down a little bit?
Are you talking about half guard top or half guard bottom, right?
Playing half guard. Playing half guard from the bottom.
Okay. And so the question was with half guard in respect to half guard bottom, what was the question?
Yeah, so what we were talking about, less athletic and older or weaker people using jiu-jitsu effectively, a lot of times the half guard is something that gets recommended to them as a really safe place to play. I was curious if you wouldn't mind breaking down half guard and
Disagree.
why. Oh, you disagree? Okay, interesting. Please explain if you don't mind.
Half guard means they're halfway past your guard. So stronger position would be guard. If you're a guy with short legs, then you learn to play open guard. If you're longer legs, then you can learn to play closed guard better. Easier to wrap your legs around someone with longer legs. But the half guard is not an ideal position because basically when you're on the bottom of half guard, the person on top is already halfway past your guard. The other problem with playing half guard is that there's very, very few submissions from bottom half guard. Unlike other dominant positions, like from guard, there's a ton of different attacks from guard. So from guard, you can do guillotine, you can do a cross collar choke, you can do kimuras, you can do armbar from guard, you can do the inverted armbar from guard. What attacks do you have available to you from half guard, bottom half guard? So really, when you're on the bottom half guard, it's not a very offensive position. What you're looking to do from bottom half guard is you're looking to advance your position. And so from bottom half guard, normally what the person on the bottom is looking to do is they're looking to sweep, or they're looking to somehow reverse the position so they can end up in a more dominant position. And even a more dominant position from bottom half guard, if you're in bottom half guard, is putting them in the full guard. Because again, once you enter into the full guard, whether it's an open or closed guard, you have far more ability to submit. So, and that's always the end goal for us in jiu-jitsu, is the finish. So yeah, I completely disagree with half guard being an ideal position to play. Even though you see it very commonly taught and played nowadays, it's not an ideal position because you lack the ability to submit, which is our end goal.
That's a very interesting take. Why do you think it is that a lot of people are preaching it as a safe place to play and as an effective position for smaller people? Where do you think the confusion might come from?
Because they don't understand jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Most people that are out there training, they don't understand the concept and the philosophy of the art. They don't really have a deep level of understanding of the art. They have a collection of moves. So they know all of these techniques and they can show you, let me show you this move and this move and this move and this move. Let me show you, they have a Rolodex of 1,000 techniques that they know. They don't have a deep understanding of the art. If you watch some of the best coaches in the world, one of the things that they encourage their students to do when they're passing guard is they say, hey, if you can't pass the guard, if you're struggling to pass the guard, then force the half guard when you're on top. Now, why would they do that? Because it's much easier to pass the half guard than the full guard. So by already accepting, oh, I'm going to play half guard instead of full guard, you're already giving up half of the guard. So what you're looking to do from the half guard when you're on bottom is you're looking to sweep. There's options to sweep. There's options to take the back. There's options to reverse the position. So sometimes like bridging them backwards. It's not exactly considered a sweep, but it's called a reversal. And so really the half guard is a battle for positioning for both people. The person on the bottom is looking to advance their position. They can, you can recover guard, right? So that's advancing your position, recovering guard. There's a video that I just did with Bernardo on BJJ Fanatics called guard retention, the principles for guard retention. So I encourage people to watch that so they develop a deeper understanding of the guard. And what you can see in that video that I do with Bernardo is many times one of the steps to passing the guard is basically clearing one leg and going into the half guard. Because now you only have one leg in between the legs, and if you can free that one leg in between the legs, you're past the guard. So, yeah, the half guard is a battle for positioning. The guy on top is looking to free his legs so that he can transition either into the cross side or the mount, and the guy on the bottom is looking to sweep, take the back, reverse the position by going from the bottom to the top, or recovering the guard.
Henry, you're well known for your brand of hidden jiu-jitsu that emphasizes the subtleties of the art that are not visible to the naked eye. What are some of your favorite examples of this within half guard, within the half guard system?
So half guard on bottom. Again, I mentioned it earlier. I think one of the keys to playing half guard on bottom is just the ability to get to your side and stay on your side, right? If you get flattened out, it definitely stifles a lot of your options of sweeping, because most sweeps require you to be on your side. If you want to put the person in your guard, you want to be more on your side. If you're flat on your back, it's harder to do a guard recovery. So, there's just a lot of little adjustments. It all depends on your opponent's holding position, how they're holding you. If they have the underhook or if you have the underhook, all these holding positions will vary. But one of the key elements is the ability to get to your side and stay on your side. So there's a lot of little adjustments. There's things that we do to help us get to our side and stay on our side. And it's usually small movements.
Now, inverting that now for the top player, for someone that's passing half guard, what are some of your favorite hidden jiu-jitsu theories that are in that position?
Going back to this concept of defense, what we've been talking about kind of for the past hour, if my opponent on the bottom wants to get to their side, then my main priority is keeping them flat, right? If I can keep them flat, then I can prevent a lot of sweeps. I can prevent guard recovery. I can stop them from doing what they want. And so, this idea of reverse engineering everything is super important for us in jiu-jitsu, because anytime you're training with someone, everything they do is to your detriment. They're not trying to help you. So by understanding from each position, what is my opponent trying to achieve, usually what you want is the exact opposite. So the guy on the bottom half guard wants to get to his side. I want to keep him flat. The underhook is a useful tool, but you can also control the hips, because once you flatten the hips, then the upper body, because you're connected, right? If I turn the hips, then the upper body starts to flatten out as well. So it depends. Again, it depends on the position. There's no specific, this idea of head control. People put a lot of emphasis on head control. It helps, but it's not necessary. It's not like a necessary tool, because there's many ways of passing the half guard where you don't have control of the head, but you have an underhook instead.
Well, guys, if you're out there listening, this is an area of your game you're hoping to improve upon. Henry just recorded 2 new no-gi instructionals with us. One focuses on top half guard and the other focuses on bottom half guard. So check that out at bjjfanatics.com. Type in Henry Akins and they'll pop up. It's a great place to start if that's something you're looking to improve upon. Henry, in closing, man, what are some of your major goals for 2024? What are some things you hope to accomplish this year?
You know what? This year, I'm actually taking time off a little bit from all of my travels and all of my camps and everything. This year, I'm just taking some time for myself to just focus on myself, get back in shape. The last 20 years, I've been so focused on teaching and pouring energy into others, because that's what a teacher does. A teacher, the goal of a teacher and like a competitor is two polar opposites. A teacher is all about helping others, where if you're competing, it's all about focusing on yourself. And so my focus for so long has been helping other people through teaching jiu-jitsu. This year, I kind of felt like I needed to take some time for myself. So I'm actually not traveling so much. And I'm just getting myself back in shape and focusing on my own training.
Well, folks, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Henry, I appreciate your time, man. It's great to have you back for the 4th time. Right. You always bring great technical insight to the table, and it's greatly appreciated. You're welcome back anytime you want to come back in the future.
Thanks.
Absolutely. For anyone out there that wants to keep up with Henry, it's easy to do so. He's active on Facebook, so you can follow him there. He's also on Instagram, Henry Akins BJJ. His YouTube channel is Hidden Jiu-Jitsu. It's a great channel with a lot of really awesome concepts and videos, so subscribe and hit the little bell icon to get notified when he adds new videos. His website is hiddenjujitsu.com. That's a great place to keep up with his seminars and where he's going to be teaching. If you're not able to make it to one of his seminars, you can learn from Henry anywhere in the world here at bjjfanatics.com. We discussed today in depth his 2 new no-gi instructionals focusing on half guard, both from top and bottom. So make sure you guys check that out. And Henry, you're going to be in Singapore pretty soon, around August, correct? When and where is that going to be?
Yeah, during my last kind of extensive trip, I stopped in Singapore to train with Shatri Sityartong, who is the head of 1FC. And he was so blown away by the training that we had together. He invited me back. So I'm going to be there at the end of August 25th at Evolve MMA in Singapore, doing a seminar.
Outstanding. Well, man, if you guys are anywhere near there, definitely drop in to get that. That would be an amazing seminar to attend. And again, guys, if you can't, you can learn from him anywhere at bjjfanatics.com. And that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the BJJ Fanatics podcast.